Winds howl across the dark volcanic plains, carrying blizzards that quickly bury anything stationary.
In Iceland, winter doesn't transition gradually. It descends suddenly like a shroud.
It covers the landscape, obscuring the sun for months, with temperatures often dropping below freezing. Fierce storms from the North Atlantic bring winds strong enough to knock down any adult.
When the first Norse settlers landed on this shore in the 9th century, they faced a survival problem.
It demanded all their wisdom and ingenuity. The question was, how to build houses.
How to build houses in a land completely devoid of trees.
Before this, Vikings crossing the ocean from Scandinavia were familiar with building longhouses. They built them with rectangular timber, featuring vertical wooden walls and pitched shingle roofs.
They were skilled in crafting oak and pine, knowing how to split large trunks into flat planks.
They assembled sturdy frames, capable of withstanding the heavy winter snow.
However, upon arriving in Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, the new settlers realized these lands were almost barren.
This land is unforgiving.
Except for a few sparse birch bushes clinging to the hillsides, there was no oak or pine wood.
Only barren rocks, wild grass, and peat bogs stretched to the horizon. Contrary to simple architectural thought, this was a fierce battle for survival.
The harsh North Atlantic climate never tolerated any mistakes.
A shelter lacking heat retention would immediately threaten lives, risking frostbite, hypothermia, and death. Meanwhile, heating fuel was extremely scarce. Daylight gradually disappeared. The ground itself froze solid. Faced with this critical situation, the Norse settlers made a pivotal decision. They laid the foundation for their survival on this cold land. Instead of struggling against nature,
They chose to integrate and utilize the very elements of the environment to create living spaces.
the Vikings transformed the frozen earth into sturdy walls, roofing their homes with wild grass and digging into the ground. These structures blended perfectly with the natural landscape. From a distance, they looked like grassy hills with doors.
These were the characteristic turf houses or longhouses, with walls made from countless peat blocks and dense grassy earth.
This thickness was enough to retain all body heat, while providing durability for many generations.
That design proved incredibly effective. Inside the earth-covered great halls,
Viking families safely navigated the dark and cold months, thanks to a single open fire.
This, combined with the superior insulation of the surrounding earth, is the story of how the Norse designed their survival strategy. They survived in one of Earth's harshest environments, using the very elements that once threatened their lives.
The first challenge they had to overcome was the source of building materials.
In mainland Scandinavia, wood resources were extremely abundant. A Norse chieftain could fell dozens of oak trees to erect a large longhouse in just a few weeks.
In contrast, in Iceland, only about 30% of the island's area could sustain sparse birch forests.
Furthermore, these birch trees were very small, completely incomparable to the towering pines of Norway.
Archaeological evidence confirmed that the first settlers faced severe wood shortages upon arrival. High-quality timber for structural support was almost non-existent. The only material they had was turf. Directly beneath the thin grass layer covering the island's surface were thick layers of partially decomposed plant matter. This peat could be cut into earth bricks to be stacked. The blocks were light enough for humans to transport by hand.
but also heavy enough to stay fixed in place after arrangement. More importantly, peat possessed a superior property that wood lacked.
That was excellent insulation. The cellular structure of decomposed plant fibers could trap air in countless small pockets.
This created a natural barrier, effectively preventing cold from outside. A 1-meter thick turf wall could retain heat much better than a wooden wall.
That's why the Norse began the process of turf extraction.
They cut rectangular blocks of earth from hillsides, roughly the size of a loaf of bread,
keeping the dense root system tightly woven into the grass above. These turf blocks were then stacked using a herringbone technique. Directly beneath the thin grass layer covering the island's surface were thick layers of partially decomposed plant matter.
This prevented the risk of wall collapse. The walls gradually rose, block by block, reaching a thickness of 1 to 2 meters.
When observed from the outside, these turf walls appeared as a living entity. The grass on the surface continued to grow, while the dense root system tightly bound the turf blocks together. In summer, wildflowers bloomed on the roofs, making the structures blend with the surrounding nature.
However, turf alone could not support the entire roof. To solve this problem, the Norse needed wood. In their new world, wood became an extremely precious resource, and no piece of wood was wasted. Every beam had to be utilized to its maximum. Therefore, they looked out to the vast ocean.
Arctic Ocean currents operated as a powerful natural system. Large Siberian rivers, including the Ob, Yenisei, and Lena, they continuously discharged melting ice water northwards through vast taiga forests. This current carried countless tree trunks,
Felled by storms, river erosion, or spring floods. The logs drifted into the Arctic Ocean and became trapped within sea ice.
The ice mass moved slowly for months, even years, drifting westward over the top of the Earth due to polar currents.
Part of the ice melted off Greenland, while the rest continued to drift south past Iceland. As the ice blocks broke apart in warmer waters, the logs they carried were released. For the Norse, this was a priceless gift. Driftwood washed ashore on Iceland's beaches, with quantities varying greatly year to year.
However, whenever they appeared, they were cherished like treasures by the locals.
According to the laws of that time, coastal landowners had legal ownership of any driftwood that washed into their area.
People hauled logs inland, dried them, and carefully split them. A good beam could be used for a door frame, while sturdy wooden posts would support the roof.
Since the walls were already supported by turf, wood didn't need to bear the entire house's weight.
Excavations at the earliest Norse houses indicated that in the initial phase, when driftwood was abundant, builders often used large, unsplit logs. However, as this supply dwindled over time, they quickly adapted.
Later generations split logs lengthwise to create 2 beams from a single trunk.
They reused wood from old, abandoned structures and accepted paying expensive costs to import a small amount of wood from Norway.
Every piece of wood was preserved, reused, and passed down through generations in the family.
in an environment where most materials like turf could be continuously harvested, wood was the only irreplaceable item.
The turf house building process was systematic and required much effort.
First, they chose a building site, often on slopes to aid drainage.
They leveled the ground and laid a foundation of flat stones. This stone foundation served 2 important roles.
It prevented the turf walls from directly contacting the damp ground to avoid rot, and it created a sturdy base.
In Greenland, even churches adopted this technique, with stone foundations supporting turf walls over 1.5 meters thick.
After the foundation was complete, the wooden frame was erected. Vertical posts were deeply buried or placed on stone bases, connected by horizontal beams. A ridge beam ran the length of the structure, acting as the spine of the roof. This frame was minimized, just enough to maintain the general shape. Immediately after, the turf stacking process began. The builders stacked the turf blocks around the frame, angling them inwards at about 45 degrees. The walls slowly rose, each row of earth compacted into the row below.
When completed, the wall could be nearly 2 meters thick at the base and tapered as it rose.
Next was the roofing process. Driftwood rafters were laid across the ridge beam, then covered by multiple successive layers of turf until completely sealed. From above, the house looked like a long green mound, with a door at the gable end. In winter, snow accumulated on the roof, providing an additional layer of insulation.
When it rained, water seeped into the turf and drained out through the root system.
The structure was like a breathing organism, settling into and blending completely with the hillside.
Most Norse turf houses had a rectangular layout and were called longhouses.
Their length ranged from 12 to over 20 meters, while the width was 4 to 6 meters. The central room, or great hall, called the skali, was the heart of the entire house.
This was the communal living space where the whole family ate, worked, and slept.
In the very center of the hall was an open fire pit. This fire pit was not like modern fireplaces,
but a hole dug deep into the floor, surrounded by stones and fueled by peat or driftwood. The house had no chimney. Smoke from the fire rose to the roof and escaped through a small vent called aljori. This vent was designed to be small. On calm days, thick smoke accumulated inside the hall, stinging the residents' eyes. The smoke also caused the turf walls and wooden beams to gradually turn dark over time. Maintaining the fire required constant attention. Someone always had to be present to add fuel.
Adjust the smoke vent and keep the embers alive all night. However, this small fire pit was the decisive factor.
It allowed people to sustain life. The thermal principles of the turf house operated very efficiently. Heat radiated from the fire in all directions. In a typical wooden structure, most of this heat would quickly escape.
But for turf houses, the thick turf walls with large thermal mass would absorb and store heat.
Turf, though taking a long time to heat up, once it absorbed heat, it would radiate it very slowly. The wall surface became warm to the touch. The air inside, thanks to the low ceiling and very few openings, remained warm, even as the fire slowly died down. Additionally, heat radiated from human bodies. The breath of family members, steam from cooking, and daily activities also contributed to increasing the warmth.
All accumulated inside the surrounding earth shell, creating a stable microclimate, even when outside temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Celsius.
And blizzards howled at 40 miles per hour. The air inside the 2-meter-thick turf layer remained warm.
Residents could live comfortably with just a thin tunic. Archaeological results in Greenland and Iceland proved that the temperature inside well-maintained turf houses
Could be tens of degrees higher than outside. The house acted like a thermal battery.
It accumulated heat during the day and slowly released it at night, protecting residents from extreme Arctic weather fluctuations. The interior space arrangement further enhanced heat retention. Along both sides of the Great Hall, low benches made of wood or stone were built. These benches served as seating during the day and became beds at night. Family members slept close together,
Covered with animal hides or woven blankets. Guests and servants also slept here, all gathered around the central fire pit.
This was not merely a living habit, but a mandatory survival strategy. The closer to the fire, the warmer one stayed. Distributing space would waste heat. Therefore, turf house architecture forced people to live communally
and allocate space according to a thermal optimization model. In some houses, auxiliary spaces were directly connected to the Great Hall. Cattle or sheep pens could be located right next to the main hall, separated by a partition wall but sharing the same roof.
Heat radiated from animal bodies helped increase the warmth of human living spaces.
The Vikings understood this principle. They didn't warm the livestock, but used the livestock to warm the house.
In wealthier households, kitchens or storage rooms might be built separately, but the Great Hall and fire pit remained the center of all activities.
Lowering the floor was another clever technique. Many turf houses were built semi-subterranean.
Dug deep into the ground so the floor was lower than the surrounding terrain. This design reduced surface area exposed to wind, while utilizing the natural insulation of the earth. At depths below the frost line, ground temperature remained stable year-round. Lowering the floor ensured the ground did not transfer cold to the space above. The surrounding earth mound formed an additional thermal buffer, protecting the walls from erosion by blizzards. Snow could cover the roof thickly, but the walls remained safe.
The house was completely hidden from the harsh weather. This architectural strategy was not unique to the Norse, but was independently developed by many other Arctic cultures. In Labrador, Inuit families built winter houses with moss-covered turf blocks, wooden frames, and a central fire pit. In Alaska, the Thule people, ancestors of modern Inuit, built pit houses with driftwood and whalebone frames, covered with turf outside.
Many of these structures, over 300 years old, surprisingly shared similar structures with Norse turf houses.
Rectangular layout, thick turf walls, low entrance, and a central fire pit. The laws of physics do not change with culture.
Cold is always the same, earth retains heat, and fire provides warmth. People everywhere found the same solution.
In Scotland, where Norse settlers established communities in the Orkney and Hebrides Islands, turf also became a standard building material. Through excavations at sites like Brew of Bursay, archaeologists found Norse longhouses from the 10th and 11th centuries.
These structures featured stone walls combined with turf, extending over 20 meters, with a central fire pit, dirt floor,
and a semi-subterranean design similar to Iceland. This technique spread everywhere the Norse landed.
Adapted to local conditions but retaining core principles. However, turf houses required constant maintenance. Turf would decompose over time, grass would die, and rain would erode it. Every few years, the outer layer of turf had to be replaced with fresh blocks. In particular, the roof needed continuous care, as stagnant water could seep through and damage the interior. The grass on the roof had to be trimmed, and drainage ditches kept clear. The house was like a living organism, requiring constant care.
If neglected, it would quickly collapse and melt into the hillside.
This continuous repair meant a turf house rarely lasted more than 1 or 2 generations without major renovations. However, the stone foundations remained durable. When a structure deteriorated, a new house would be built directly on the old foundation.
Using the same footprint for centuries, layers of habitation accumulated. Archaeologists excavating Norse remains often found multiple construction phases,
layered on top of each other. Old walls were buried beneath new ones, new fire pits built on old ones, and floors raised due to accumulated debris and ash. The house became a history book, written in layers over generations. Social structure both shaped the house and was reciprocally influenced by the architectural space.
In medieval Europe, architecture clearly reflected class divisions. Kings lived in stone castles, nobility in timber manors,
while peasants lived in wattle and daub huts. But in Iceland, this hierarchy was almost abolished in architecture.
Everyone, from chieftains to farmers to laborers, lived in turf houses. The harsh environment itself created this architectural equality.
One could not build stone castles without stone quarries, nor timber halls without forests. Therefore, even
the display of social status only occurred within the interior space. A wealthy chieftain could
Or build a house within a house, a small wooden structure inside the large turf shell. But from the outside, his house looked no different from a poor farmer's house, a grassy mound with a door. This uniformity reflected a harsh reality. Nature did not care about status, and the cold discriminated against no one.
The Great Hall was not just a shelter, but also the center of family identity, preserving lineage and honor. In medieval Europe, architecture clearly reflected class divisions. Kings lived in stone castles, nobility in timber manors.
the fire pit was where oaths were taken, disputes settled, and stories told during long winter nights.
Spiritual life was also tied to the fire pit. Before Christianity arrived in the late 10th century, the head of the family, sometimes a gothi, chieftain priest, performed sacrificial rituals at the family altar next to the fire pit. The fire represented life, warmth, and light. To let the fire die out meant inviting disaster. After converting to Christianity, the symbolic meaning transferred to the new faith.
Small turf churches were built using the same residential techniques: low, rectangular, grass-roofed.
And only distinguished from houses by a cross at the entrance. Inside, a small fire still burned for warmth during services.
The architecture remained, only the rituals changed. Using earth for insulation, harnessing thermal mass to stabilize temperature,
and reducing surface area to limit heat loss. Turf houses are a testament to human adaptability.
Faced with a scarcity of resources, the Vikings turned grass into walls, used ocean currents to transport wood.